Hey, chat. Oh, look at that. My lights turned off. Hey, chat. Welcome to another Real Good stream on Thursday. If you don't know what Real Good Thursdays are, where have you been? Real Good AI is a 501c3 nonprofit founded by Mark, the Mark you know, probably Markiplier Mark, and my wife, Mandy, Dr. Mandy. If you follow our socials, which you should, I am the board president, but I know nothing. I'm here because I know how the internet works. Today is going to be a guest stream. Every other week, we have fascinating guests on. We have scientists. We have had people in marketing and advertising. We've had all kinds of people. Today, we're lucky enough to have a scientist and a person with a fascinating life experience. We are going to be talking to Dr. Justin Norman and interviewing. I'll be asking questions. I'll be helping, but running the interview really will be two of your favorites from the Real Good staff. Dr. Imen is here and Dr. Eric is here. And this should be a really interesting conversation. Justin's research, as far as I have been able to understand it, seems fascinating. I think, chat, you will have a lot of questions and interest in the things that he has worked on and is working on. But thank you so much. Should I call you Doctor? I don't want to be too formal. You prefer Justin, Dr. Norman?
Definitely call me Justin. Justin is the right term.
Well, thank you so much, Justin, for being here. We really appreciate the time. And yeah, Imen, take it away. Do the thing. Do your thing.
So, hello everyone. Today we're talking to Dr. Justin Norman. So, I usually do the introduction, but I think he's such a fascinating background. I'll let him tell us quickly about his background and what did he do throughout these educational years. So, go ahead, Justin.
Oh, wow. No pressure at all. All right. Well, yeah, I guess I could maybe just cut it into three different phases of life. I'm still in phase 3 and hope to have many more, but we could start that way. I'm a little different than maybe most people you would have met coming into the science world because my background starts in government. I went to the Naval Academy actually and did computer science there. Did the normal progression and ended up being an officer in the Marine Corps for a while. And then after that,
Thank you for your service.
Oh yeah, my honor. It is. There's a lot in there, but I think what it really helped me to do is to be ready for, the field that data science, AI, machine learning, whatever we want to call it, turned into. Because I did a lot of that stuff in a similar sort of vein while I was a part of the service, and then kind of pivoted into doing it for industry companies like Booz Allen. Then eventually I worked for Cisco, places like Fitbit, Cloudera, Yelp, in a variety of different roles, from individual engineers, where I was just fingers to keyboard solving, big data at the time problems, all the way till more recently where, it was more traditional machine learning. So the sorts of things you might see in your recommendation systems in your Netflix, or in particular Yelp, if you were using that as a way to predict what you might want to eat next or what kind of menu you might like, worked on problems like that. And then in the third phase, I got the bug for research, and so I decided to leave all the industry stuff behind for a while, and then went to UC Berkeley and started a PhD program. And that work kind of is what spawned the labs that I'm a part of now. Working with Hani Farid as my advisor while I was there. And his lab is really focused on computational photography, digital forensics, and now content authenticity. So this is all about trying to, especially in the video and image world, determine what is real and what's not real, and develop tools to help to determine those things, and to help especially individuals and organizations to keep that provenance of information, which is really, as I think everybody knows, becomes super important as more and more generated content is created. And so now I'm focused on a couple of things, both kind of in that same space, but around the robustness of AI and ML algorithms, specifically in the generative world, and then of course in content authenticity and deepfake detection. So that's kind of where I live, and I'm happy to go deeper, but that's sort of the background.
Yeah. And it's so super interesting. So, first, let me back up a little bit. So, what pushed you to kind of take a different path or career change? So, kind of a radical, not radical, but you know what I mean? Like, what kind of like motivates you to switch from the military path to the industry path? And then what made you switch from the industry part to the academic part? It's just like you are like kind of unique in that way that like most people stick in one
Yeah.
field all their lives. They can switch jobs, but like they stay in the field. You kind of tested them all. So what prompted these changes?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's like a real answer, which is probably more like life did it, just like it does for anyone else. But the meta answer to it is I try to be a naturally curious person. And you never know when you're starting a new job or starting a new field of study or, even just doing research for yourself, what's going to catch your eye. And I tend to, when I really find something interesting, instead of, reading a book on it and then moving on to the next thing, I try to go a little deeper and a little deeper. And if you keep doing that enough, especially in topics like, the things we were talking about, you might find yourself at the end of the sort of knowledge scape and you're like, well, we should know more. I want to know more. And then that leads you into, maybe doing research on it or maybe joining an industry organization which
Mhm.
does active work on that. And so, I'd say, my main, contributors to those decisions are really just finding something that I thought was really important and really interesting and that I wanted to know more about and just not putting it down until, I got to something that was either sustainable for me from a like work standpoint or intellectually was really sustainable to continue doing for a while. And so that's how I got here.
I see. And you mentioned so the different experience in Fitbit and Yelp
Yeah.
and everything that industry offered you.
Mhm.
Were you doing research there, or it was like mostly applications? So you wanted to go deep into research. What did you do there?
Yeah, it sort of depends on the role. So at places like Cisco and Fitbit, it was much more applied, machine learning or applied engineering work. Either I was doing, fingers to keyboard work, or I was running teams that were doing, engineering work that was, for clients, for customers, or for problems that were important to the company. At Cloudera, it was a little different because I was working with an organization that had been acquired into it called Fast Forward Labs, and they were a research organization in particular. So like their whole workflow was to look at what was sort of state of the art but wasn't yet adopted in industry, and then try to turn that into an industry adjacent or an industry oriented engineering challenge that they could then solve and then work with clients on. And so at Cloudera, I got really lucky to work with a bunch of PhD and PhD level folks who are really doing, I think, envelope pushing, for lack of a better term, work. And I got to see what it was like to really work at the edge of what's possible, at the edge of what state of the art is. And I wasn't, capable of really understanding and doing it at that time. I hadn't had the training, but it was really exciting to kind of see what that looked like. And I think that was probably the seed that was like, well, I gotta figure out how to be a part of this, even though I had the engineering skills or the management skills to be able to, to lead those teams. I didn't necessarily have it as an individual. And so that was, the next natural step.
I see. But I have to say, when you did your move to the research part, you picked a very important and but a very interesting path, which was the digital forensic,
Yeah.
the forensic science. So can you explain a little bit what is this digital forensics lab science that did there?
Sure. I mean, like, to be super, I guess, honest to it, I first was just very interested in computer vision in general and computational photography. And that's,
Okay.
I think
What
more
is
accessible.
digital photography?
Yeah. So computational photography is using, computers or digital computation tools to try to push the envelope of what could be done with traditional optics. So I think most folks understand, or at least if you don't, this is easy Google, that the eye functions very similarly to the way we've designed cameras, and there's a reason for that. But when we moved into the digital space, we replaced the sort of camera sensor or film, impression with like a digital sensor, one that could read RGB, red, green, and blue, and then the channels, and then intensities of light along all those channels. And like that's how we encode images. But once you've got a digital form of something, you can start to do some really, I think, advanced and pretty interesting things that are beyond what like you would naturally expect to happen with a traditional camera. And so computational photography is about processing and combining and manipulating image data, and now often in real time, to create images that wouldn't be possible with a conventional camera. So there are a lot of different fields or subfields within that, like depth estimation, body pose analysis, image restoration, style transfer, and all these things are the same fields that contribute to generative techniques, like you might be experiencing now, where you see filters, for example, like entirely new frame generation on the diffusion of the GAN models. And then, even more, I guess, alarmingly, the deepfake in real time, analysis that happens with folks. And so I became interested just in general with that. And then the subfield of forensics science and sort of the high stakes analysis is to try to figure out how do we equip the number of organizations and individuals with the right tools and techniques and frameworks to be able to understand the provenance of images, to understand what is actually real and what is fake, and understand what adversarial mechanisms to manipulate images look like, so that we can do the right thing, whether it be to defeat those things and prevent them from happening, whether it be to detect them and to offer that as information for leaders or organizations, or if you're an individual who has been a victim of one of those, to give you recourse, right? So there's a lot of work kind of done at the active side. So like this is once things have already been done, and there's also a lot of work at the beginning of it to understand how these algorithms and these systems work, and to be able to kind of provide that information back to whoever needs it, whether it be organizations, individuals, governments, etc.
So
And
forensic.
to clarify, sorry, just to clarify, with computational photography, you mentioned a lot of problems that you solve. Are all of those being solved by AI approaches these days, or are some of them just still functional algorithmic solutions?
Yeah, I would say that, like, first of all, I mean, saying the word AI opens up a whole, can of worms.
Believe us,
And so like I'm going to be really, really careful, because I've been using, autonomous mechanisms of computation for my entire career that are, by definition AI, but not probably what people mean today when they're talking about like transformer-based or diffusion-based generative AI systems, right? So like I will have to make that distinction when answering your question. So the answer is like, yeah, like there are tons of automated mechanisms that use traditional computational work, like we're talking about like high school algebra and calculus methods for computational photography. That's been around for many, many, many years, like as long as there have been digital methods for doing things. But now what you're starting to see is those sorts of techniques get wrapped up into both deep learning based approaches, and also there's these newer family of generative systems do things. I would call it like a grab bag of different transformations and generative techniques. And so those problems that you're talking about, like I don't know that I would say they're being solved, but they're certainly being addressed and implemented with these new generated techniques. And I think one of the challenges we all have is when we use the older techniques, maybe they worked a little bit less seamlessly, but we had some information about the types of techniques that were used, how they were used, and when, and it gave us some tools in the forensic community and in the content authenticity community to better understand what happened and who did it and whether or not it was authentic. Now I think we're losing some of that fidelity, and it can cause real problems. Obviously, they're well documented all over the sort of scope of images and videos. But of course, like, on the other side of things, the reason why they're so prevalent is because the outcomes can be really impressive in some cases. So I think it's an unsatisfying answer to your question. Like, yeah, I think they're being used, but I wouldn't say that like it's new to have AI in computational photography.
And so in your experience in computational forensics, did you ever actually work on cases, or was it all theoretical data sets?
No, yeah, pretty much right out of the gate as soon as you develop some of the skill set, because it is so, I think, challenging and opaque for people who are working in, especially the criminal justice system. If you're working in labs like the one I was, you get exposed to the actual case law and actual case structures. So yeah, I've been doing that since I started. I don't expect that will change. For the most part, I've been lucky that it's been.
Sorry, as
Yeah.
what? As an expert for these cases?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So experts, there are also situations where people have a specific, piece of content that they want evaluated, because they want to have someone who has both the background and is neutral to be able to provide an adjudication. And then, of course, there are situations where people are trying to um, do image computational image analysis, or even manipulation of images, but they want to do it in a way which has that prominence, and are not, want to be above board about it, right? And so there's a lot of different ways to contribute to that. And like, again, if you develop the skill set, it's one of those things that's just sort of par for the course.
Mhm.
And so does that mean that you've had to testify as an expert witness before?
I have been
Anything that
involved.
far?
I've been involved. I got to be super careful, obviously, not to
Yeah,
get
yeah,
into
yeah.
any specifics, but like I said, it's a part of the job.
That's
So
good.
I want to know, in simple words, please, how do we do deepfake detection or like content authenticity? Is it possible to
Yeah,
simply
the,
explain it
the,
out?
it's possible to talk about it. The answer is, it depends. It's really complicated and hard problem because there's no one type of deepfake. There's no one type of attack. There's no one type of adversarial approach to images. The reality is, like, most effective deepfakes actually don't use the most advanced techniques, and they also only use one technique, right? So remember, when you're a person that's somewhat distracted, maybe on your phone, you're looking at a bunch of content, and then all of a sudden something catches your eye that's really crazy. You're probably
Mm.
viewing it in lower resolution. You're probably viewing it alongside a lot of other content. It's probably in motion, right? There are a lot of contributing factors nowadays to make it effective, but not necessarily the most advanced thing in the world. But I will say, the frame to frame identity transfer, which is like where people are literally just deepfake, another person drives someone's face, or an entirely new image comes up, like that's getting better. But there are
Like George
mechanisms.
Clooney or Brad Pitt asking for some money to a
Sure.
lady and asking,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
like stuff like that's getting better, and it's harder and harder every day to detect it. But those have historically been a bit easier to deal with because over time, as I think everybody understands that like a video is just a bunch of different still images put together in motion, right, over time, and like cameras are actually really good at capturing almost exactly what happens, provided you have the correct configuration of the camera. The camera is sensitive enough, all those sorts of things. The light's good, all that. But generative tools tend to struggle over that same time period, right, frame to frame. And so that's where you can start to look for artifacts in the generation process. You can look for like things that aren't natural. You can look for lighting, reflectance issues that would be done perfectly in a regular image capture, but like don't get done well in a generation. And those are the sorts of things that you look for. Now, I mentioned before, like over time, these models get better and better. And as we detect them, as we build interventions, the model systems use that as a way to improve, right? And so, I think as we progress over the next 5 to 10 years, it's going to get really challenging, especially in the real time way, to be able to do that kind of detection. So the answer to your question is it is sometimes possible, but it also depends on a myriad of factors, which you're not in control of as a person who is being recipient of deepfake, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's been the ongoing issue with the field, and we continue to fight against it.
Yeah, and so you sort of touched on this, but I just want to make it clear. So is there a modality of deepfake that is easier to detect than another? Like, is a still image easier to detect than a video versus an audio file or something like that?
It all depends on the type of attack that's happening or the type of deepfake or content generation used, right? Now, this is the thing that's like, I know it's unsatisfying to hear, but the thing that is just true. So there are still image generation techniques like the older GANs where their artifacts in a still image were extremely easy to detect if you knew what you were looking for, right? Like they couldn't do ears properly, or they wouldn't, in their eye, in people's eyes, there's all the natural light reflection, and you would be able to detect that. Now, the newer image generators, if you were to say like, vintage 2023 and beyond, that stuff's probably gone. So your older detectors may not work. So if you were using an earlier generation technique, and a still image might be the easiest way to find something, right? Now, for a while, audio was also really easy, or like easier to detect, because the audio generators made the same mistakes across the time, like, and they were really easy to sort of pull out, even if the human ear or an untrained human ear wasn't accurate enough to do it. Computers could figure it out. They're starting to get a lot better, especially with regards to speech. Music and instrumentation is still pretty difficult for generators, so easier to detect. But speech is become really challenging as things like vocal prosody and the sort of the like waveform, the actual physics behind it become more accurate in the models. Video used to be a place also where we were like, okay, well, we know you're going to make a mistake at some point in this frame generation. You make 100,000 frames. We're going to find some of them that are not in place. So I wrote a couple papers about that, even just using like simple statistical methods, like things we learned in high school, to be able to detect this. And it was pretty effective until last year or so, where these generators became, even frame to frame, really accurate. So I would say it changes which one is easier to do depending on how advanced the generators are, and then also whether or not us as researchers in this area have like a breakthrough in detection, right? So it changes.
And I have a practical question. So
Yeah.
again, you are a specialist. I'm thinking about the normal person
Yeah.
who is not tech savvy,
Yeah.
who doesn't know all these details. How can we help the regular person to avoid these deepfake and these like dangerous scams that can emerge from
Yeah.
it? To happen to them? Like, how can we kind of give them the procedures? And another question kind of linked to it, but does the government like use your tools and your models in order to help? Because like some scams come from like a fake government thing, a fake government call, social security call, or something like that. So
Yeah.
how do we prevent that for the general population?
Yeah, I wish I had an answer that would, make you all feel good. But the reality is we're living in a really challenging time with regards to this. The best thing that individuals can do is to have good hygiene around their digital personas, around the content that they produce, and then also to use the tools that the content producers or the generators now have. So there's watermarking is like an example of a more recent tool coming out.
Yeah.
There are, mechanisms of embedding, identification, hashing, all that sort of stuff in content you actually do generate. But on the real time side of things, the new generation, it's a really tough situation. Unfortunately, one of the things that I think we need to focus on the most, that's the hardest to do, is really supporting legislation and accountability when there is harm actually done. Because I don't think that there's a technical innovation even on the horizon that's going to like be ubiquitous for all these modalities, for all these types of attack surfaces. But right now, there really isn't any consequences to doing it either. And I think that's obviously not a sustainable way for us to live, right? Especially just from like, taking all of the politics out of it, just like having an idea of what truth is, and being like, comfortable that what you're seeing is actually a good representation of whatever it is you're trying to view. Like we need that in order for society to function. And so that's something I think all of us can advocate for, and to make sure that our representatives know that we care about. And I think it's dramatically under-resourced at the moment. And then as far as the government, I mean, it's a huge problem for everyone. So if you have a problem as an individual level, you can bet that like at the like multinational geopolitical level, it's an even bigger problem. They certainly do have access to some of the most advanced techniques, but again, we talked about it earlier on the stream. It's a really wide surface. It's not just one type of signature. It's not just one modality. It's not just one provider or one source that this is coming from. It's an always on sort of thing. It's just like cybersecurity where like you're always being attacked. So the question is, how do you mitigate the attacks and how do you direct your resources towards the ones that are the most potentially harmful? And so I think that's where the government is focused. One thing we really need to be careful about as we go farther with regards to government is that this is not just a federal problem. This is a problem that affects individuals, in schools. I think everybody has been reading all the stories about how we have these Nudify apps that unfortunately are being deployed against kids all the time, both inside the school system and out of it. And then there are also scams that are targeting officials at the state level, right? People who control budgets or control safety measures. And so I think it's important not to get folded up just on the like, okay, well, this is how it affects a war, or this is how it affects a market dynamic in the federal sense, but also to be like vigilant and to make sure we are supporting our local and state governments who are often dealing with the same issues but with far fewer resources.
Yeah, you mentioned a word that I like a lot, which is digital hygiene. This is the first time I hear about it. What is considered having a good digital hygiene?
Yeah, I think it's different for everyone, right? And everybody has their own risk profiles that they're adhering to. But for me, I can just speak about like, I don't generate content, for the sake of it. And when I do, I'm aware of where I put it and aware of the provenance of it, right? So I know, where I created it. I have copies of it that are known good. And then when I see something that is a misrepresentation, I take action immediately to either for the platform that's hosted on, or for if I know who's doing the manipulation for them to take it down. And I can give you like a perfect example that I wrote a couple of papers that were almost immediately just sort of scraped and then re-engineered as another person's content and then uploaded into, I think, like fairly reputable venues and conferences.
Oh my God,
And
the
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it was pretty crazy. It was like a whole new profile of a person, but it was the exact same content. And there's just no way a person would have come to. There's no citations. It was really bad. And so, like, because I've set up alerts and all those sorts of things for the type of content that I put out there. I found out about it, and then it was like immediately, takedown requests. This is like engagement with the conference organizers and etc. And like, it actually helped them to realize they were being attacked. They didn't realize it. It wasn't just me. There was a number of other people who had been targeted in this way. So I think like if we are passive about it, I think it becomes more and more a part of the system. And then there's just noise that we're all dealing with. But if we're active about it and vigilant, and we are as a society and a community working together to support each other, it becomes harder to to attack the broader set of people who are awake, right? So like I think that's like what I mean by hygiene, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It's just like it is cool that you have all these systems, but for a regular Joe who just have like their pictures stolen or their artwork stolen, this is so hard to kind of like know about it first and then try to get it back. Like I see more and more artists like create this coalition of like artists that kind of try to protect their work from AI but like in terms of like training the models and building the models, can I, for example, not allow AI, and I say it between quotes, to use my data or my product as a training for their models? Is it possible?
You certainly can encode new information that you are, you're generating. Like that's where the watermarking and the there's a bunch of different initiatives around like no train and refusal that allow you to poison effectively your images or your data when they're going into new systems, right? And so that works until the generative tool learns to ignore it or to go around it. But for the generation it's on, it certainly will be effective. And there's like lots of them. For audio, there's for video, there's for images, and those things actually, can be pretty effective. The challenge with this though is that it doesn't really like handle any new generations of encoding. It only works for the ones that that it currently knows about and was developed for those watermarks are developed for. And it also doesn't do anything for any of the images that you had for however many years that all of us have been on the internet making content and have already been vacuumed up. And so, I've used those things, especially on my likeness images. And what I found is that, especially the ones that have scraped like Clearview AI and places like that, which have scraped images off of sources, I think before the laws were restrictive enough, they've already got you. And so they'll be able to create, an imperfect, maybe not contemporary version of your likeness or your content, but still have it, right? So this is the moment we're in where it's really important to do the the digital component of this, right? Which is sign up for everything you can, refuse whenever you can, support all those workflows, but also you have to be aware that like it may already be a problem or it may continue to be a problem with previous data, and so you've got to do the manual part as well. And so that's the thing. As an individual, we're at a disadvantage, but that doesn't mean we're powerless.
Yeah.
And so we talked a little bit about the putting the onus on the end user and other people like that to detect when deep fakes are generated. Do you think there's any culpability of the generators themselves to know when a deep fake is going to be generated and to prevent the generation from occurring? Because I remember early on in the days of image generation, the tools refused to generate faces, for example, because of that exact worry. But that entire policy seems to have gone out the window.
Yeah, I think you're using the right word, which is policy as opposed to technology or architecture. I think architecturally, it's certainly possible to do, and certainly possible to not release versions of it which allow generation of or notification or things like that, right? Like those controls are understood very well and can be in place for almost any architecture you would want to commercially release or publicly release. I think we've got a policy challenge, and the policy challenge is that unfortunately we have both a capitalist driver, which is that like people want to be able to do these things, which I don't think is a good enough reason personally, but I don't think the four of us are the ones that get to make that call. And then on the other side of things, on the capital side of things, there's also a sort of velocity challenge. And what I mean by that is the technology and trying to keep this accessible, like the technology on the video and image generation refresh used to be like every 3 years you'd get something that was truly mind-blowing, but it was still like you could tell, but it was like getting better. Now we're talking like maybe every few months, if not more frequently, we see these like generational shifts in capability. And so even from a policy standpoint, it's like whack-a-mole, right? You ban or you tell a certain generator or a provider, like, hey, don't do that, or here are the things you have to do, and then all of a sudden, from a completely different country, from a completely different technical architecture, there's something out there that isn't being regulated, right? And so we keep going through this cycle over and over again. And I think comprehensively, the intent of what we're trying to sort of regulate needs to be dealt with at a higher hierarchy. And then we also need to think about, making sure the resources for detection, mitigation, and prevention are allocated at the right level, because certainly us doing this in labs after the fact isn't enough to safeguard the public. But it's a very expensive problem to be able to do well, right? So I think you're right to use the word like, hey, we have a policy challenge here, because I think that's ultimately where we have to spend most of our time before we can get into the technical weeds. I know plenty of people in my field who are willing to spend the time and energy to try to make this better, but it has to be something that is a part of a larger movement.
But actually, following on that, your experience in the industry before going in academic, so you were in these like rooms with these tech people who were taking these decisions. So from your experience with the industry, did you see this like eagerness, I don't know if it's a word, but like this willingness to do the right thing and invest in these like preventing these fake things to happen, deep fakes and harms to happen? What's your experience with that?
I think you'll again. I feel like I have to preface everything by saying this is probably an unsatisfying answer, but I don't think that there's a boogeyman out there at an individual level that everybody wants. Certainly, there are bad actors, right? And we can frame them, and certainly are useful to talk about them as people who have abused, power or authority. But for the most part, like people are aware of the harms and don't want to, at the industry level, don't want to exacerbate them, don't want to be a part of them, certainly don't want the brands associated with it. But it's really challenging to, at the tactical level, when you're building a specific feature and thinking about releasing it, understanding all the way people are going to use it, and then once people are using it, how to specifically give one or two workflows that are harmless, while avoiding all the ones that are harmful, right? Like that kind of work is important, and I think people will try to do it, but the landscape is really wide. And so from just a pure, scope perspective, like if you're a person, who has responsibility for, let me just say, you have the data platform, right? And you're a person, your job is to make sure the pipelines work. And through your pipelines, some tools or some parts of the tool are being used improperly, but that's done mostly on the front end, and the front end controls are a different team, right? And then more over storage and data, that's another team, right? And so this architectural or product level conversation we're having, which I think is the right one for us to have in this this moment, because we're the ones that are affected by it, is not a single individual with a single operational authority inside of an industry organization. And that's sometimes by design, and that's sometimes not, right? And I think we as individuals have every right to be frustrated by it, and I think governments and organizations have and NGOs and all these things that have a societal responsibility to push back on that, should do that. But I think we also have to be aware and pragmatic that I don't think there's a person sitting, at least not in my experience, wasn't a person sitting at a keyboard being I'm gonna let this terrible thing happen and I'm the adjudicator of that. It wasn't that simple.
So you
It's
think
pretty,
it's more
pretty
like
messy.
a business decision? It's more like it's costly, or it's just a lack of
It,
communication between all these coordination between all these teams?
all of those things, I think,
All of
happen.
them both. Okay.
All of those things, I think,
Because
happen.
I would also argue that it's part of the methodology
Yeah, sure.
choice as well,
Yep,
right?
that's right.
Well, it seems like what you are arguing is that we have to decide we want to get into understanding the technology well enough to reverse things first. But I would also argue that even if everybody was on board with finding out the problems and was putting their full faith effort towards detecting deepfakes and preventing them and yada yada yada, the methodology choice itself also lends itself to being obtuse to solving that problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good way to put it, but also I think if we're doing science properly, we engage with that type of tension as the technology and as the scientific methodology before it becomes an industry tool is even released. And I think that is not a workflow I'm seeing happen. Certainly not even in academia, right? It's a lot more about pushing the state of the art forward and getting published and all those sorts of metrics that all of us know about. But I think it was obvious from the beginning, even when we're talking about things like diffusion, or we're talking about now the transformer based language generators, right? I think we all knew, because I'm not sure how far everybody here has kind of engaged with that technology, or what your feelings on it are. But if you were to build just a plain old GPT 1 or 2 style model, this is just a decoder only, all it does is just spit out words. In your earlier training loops, before you really got it to be smart enough to be coherent, it would say a bunch of really challenging things, I think really harmful things, and you would know that was a part of the possibility of the tool or the system. You just would have to know. That's the experience I've had. And I think not engaging with that difficulty at that moment and thinking about the implications of it is a organizational and industry issue, right? That didn't happen well enough. I think we all can agree. But what that intervention would have looked like, I think that's where the social science and the anthropology and the interdisciplinary work in HCI that happens in science, that's where those people are really useful. And I think as we go forward and we're thinking about these technologies and improving upon them, engaging those mechanisms of study which have experience in building and designing things that have great potential but also great risk, that's where you have to engage those folks. And I don't think that's happening enough.
So actually, you did us a good segue about LLMs because we kind of like started by these like computer vision and videos and stuff, but like most of people when they hear AI, they associate it immediately to chatbots and LLMs.
Yeah.
And so from your background, I read somewhere that like you worked on generative AI LLMs and
Yeah.
VLMs. Can you
Sure.
talk the difference between what is VLMs? We understand large model language model, but what is
Yeah.
VLMs and what's the difference between them?
Yeah. So like there's vision language models, there's multimodal language models which can take in a variety of different modes, so images, video, sometimes audio, as well as language. And then there's just language models which are focused specifically on that modality. And this is just not to get too technical about it, but as you are building the architecture of a generative system, you have a lot of choices on how you train, what inputs you give it, what tasks you fine tune the model to be able to accomplish, and then of course what does it actually generate when it provides that back to a user, in whatever form you give it. And so there are of course tools like Gemini, for example. Google's is a really well-known multimodal LLM which does image generation really well, but you condition that with text. So you describe what you want to see and then it can generate an image based on that. There are also models which are you put in an image and it can generate an image out, so it style transfers or changes it. There are models that can do that with video, and all you have. So there's a whole family of different things. I think the core sort of initial architectural decision was like we were using transformers as like the baseline. I think that's now changed, where we're like building these complicated ensembles of different types of models and architectures to produce what we want. But the bottom line is now I think we're getting away from just having single models that just produce text as an outcome, and now we're seeing like everything you can think of as a human experience coming through sort of a model and being provided as a generation. So like that's what I meant when I was talking about that stuff.
I see. And so, again, more talking about LLMs, what's your takes about like these LLMs hallucination detection?
So I wrote some papers on this as well. So just full disclosure on the bias there. So I hope that we're coming to consensus that hallucination is like a function of how these systems work, without trying to go too deep into the technology. These systems don't have inherent learning properties, even though we anthropomorphize them, we try to personify them because it's useful for us as even as scientists to describe the mechanisms of how they work in human terms. That's not actually what's going on.
How do they work? So how do we tell the people how do they work really?
So the simplest way to think about it is models do, all kinds of machine learning models learn best by example. So you give them, large amounts of information where there is a label, right, or an answer to a question, and then you give them the question, and then over time, all sorts of machine learning systems, that are supervised work this way, where they eventually learn, okay, well, I can distinguish between what is right and wrong based on the examples I've gotten, and now I see new information. And I can still do that, right, with new information, right? So I can generalize to a problem I've never seen before. With transformer-based models, you get this really. There's a couple of innovations, and like I'm gonna have to butcher it because we don't have like the 30 minutes it would take to really get to the bottom of it. But there's a couple of innovations. One is being able to attend to a lot of different related things in a sequence, and make that even simpler, like in a sentence. Like let's just take a sentence. You used to have to sequentially look at each word in a sentence and then try to relate them back. And the architectures we used before could sort of do this, but they would forget the context of what came before it as they looked at every other additional word in the sequence, right? A word in the sentence. And this is a problem. It means you can't really handle that much data at a time. The attention is all you need paper, which is the like sort of foundational understanding of foundational sort of work behind this new generation of transformer-based models, kind of flipped that and allows you to parallelize this task. So look at multiple different words in the sequence at the same time, but also look at the relationship of each word in the sequence to each other word. And you could do this leveraging, graphical processing unit, capabilities very, very quickly and over large corpuses of data, right? Really big amounts of data. And so this allows you to learn more and also learn a lot at the same time. And so that's how we get to a place where, we are able to not just sort of like understand the relationship between language, but also generate like plausible and like really, really, I guess, like attractive sequences of words or images, and there's lots of technologies that I'm skipping to get to these places, or even videos. Now, there's a piece at the end here, which I think is kind of lost on most folks, which is really important, which is that you have to decide when you have a list of like most likely things that would be next in a sequence or next in a sentence, if we're sticking with the language model. And, the highest likelihood that gets scored, whatever you want to use, as a function to give you that distribution, isn't always the best word or the most creative word. And so there are a ton of different decisions architecturally that get made about which like token or word in the next sequence to choose at that point, right? And sometimes it's exactly right, sometimes it's not right, and that happens just by the nature of how these things work. There is a randomness. It's not completely stochastic, but there is a sort of chance function or a set of creativity you have to choose as a designer at that point. And so I tell you all this to say that like that's how they're architected to work, right? We don't have perfection. We have to make a decision about where to take the risk at the end. And no matter how big your model gets, no matter how much you learn, and no matter how complex the architecture becomes, there will still be this choice or some, for some subset of the inputs, right? That you have to make. And so hallucination is always going to be there, is what I'm getting to. The question is like, can we mitigate it, or do we drive it to a place where it's not harmful? Or is there a mechanism of like augmenting it, like for, people used RAG, people now using context injection. There's lots of different other mechanisms to sort of deal with it today, to make that less of a problem, but it's still a challenge. And I don't think it's one of those things like within the family of technology we're talking about that's entirely going to be defeated. It's just a question of like, do we find applications for which that is an increasingly small problem for good outcomes, right? Systems design problem.
This is something that I talked about in my talk at a library that I gave on Friday, is that the LLM architecture is not looking for what's correct. Yeah. It's looking for what's popular.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
It's looking for something that looks like a response to the text that you gave it. Right. And the only way that correctness, quote unquote, really brings itself into the mix is in the pre-training reinforcement learning. Right.
Yeah.
Once you have the model made, you then let it give you a couple of responses, and you rate it up or down as to whether you liked the response it gave. So in that sense, that might be a way where hallucination gets controlled for, but that requires the human to catch it and to be in the domain where hallucinations might occur.
Yes. Yeah. You're really like getting to the heart of it. I mean, so we only talked about the pre-training step, and so GP, like we only talked about the P step. But there's a whole post training part of this, which is all about fine tuning it for what you want the model to actually do, whether it's instructions or like to generate new novel text or images or whatever. And then, there's of course, even after that in post processing steps for, like you mentioned, voting, and then offering sort of feedback loops back to the model. These are all things that people are working on. And I'm not trying to trivialize it at all. I'm trying to expand on that it's a hard problem to begin with. And then now we're starting to deal with real limitations. Like, are the models actually able to learn all the things they have to learn to be able to be generators reliably, and then also handle this feedback loop, and then produce a user experience which is acceptable, right? Like now we're in a situation where it's systems engineering and architecture in addition to mathematical, and algorithmic work, in addition to sort of core statistical work, right? It's a really, really messy, complicated machine. And we're building a lot of them faster than I think they are being evaluated, thoroughly, and that's just leading to a lot of challenges. But you're absolutely right that there are mitigations in place, and you experience them every time you use one of the public systems.
But then what's the solution for these like hallucinations that can kind of harm people? We've seen so many
Yeah.
lawsuits and danger of like kids using LLMs or products using LLMs, like saying crazy things or pushing people to commit suicide or crazy
Like a
things like this.
self-driving car
Yeah.
hallucinating or something like that.
Yeah, so we're jumping all over the landscape on things here, and I want to like go back to what we said at the beginning, that like AI and its limitations it's not just transformers and LLMs doing this stuff. Like, it's really important not to get to that place. Now, where they are specifically LLM works, I think the conversation we just had, it's important to keep in mind too. So whether or not it's a system that a person is directly using, right? Like, they're chatting with the chatbot, and then like whatever set of controls that vendor puts in place, like there's responsibilities that have to be, put in place to, or controls that have been put in place to deal with that sorts of things. And I think we're going to have to deal with it from a policy perspective too, which is like, is it a a system that's capable of mass harm or capable of intent harm? Like, you have to get a license to drive cars, right? You have to get a license to have a firearm, and I don't think that like we can prove today that there isn't a significant risk at that scale for some of these systems. Like, I don't think we can prove that. And so like the question is, where from a regulation perspective and where from an intervention perspective are we going to draw the line, and then who gets to make the decision about like what is acceptable and not in a context. So like, I mean, there's not a solution to the problem, because it's not one problem. It's a variety of different new surfaces we need to be aware of, because the world has changed. And I think as individuals, because we're in a moment that's like pre-regulation, the best thing we can do is to educate ourselves to the degree that's reasonable, and make our own decisions. I think about this like at the time before seatbelts. I mean, there were many years before seatbelts were required in cars in most modern nations, right? And people still drove. Now, was that a good or a bad decision? I think that is like a really individualized risk profile that people sometimes correctly and incorrectly made. But I don't think we're in a dissimilar situation, especially with regards to, folks that have less experience with interfacing with technology.
Yeah. But then, like, if something happened, and I'm driving from your experience of like forensic
Sure.
lab, if something harmful happened with these LLMs, will where is the responsibility
Yeah.
of these like companies in this harmful episode or something? Like, do they have to respond to that, or it's like just like it is the model, and this is like the uncertainty that we have, and we cannot like I hear multiple people saying like they have a guardrails and
Sure.
safety, but I still see these things, hallucinations and these things, outliers stuff happening. So
Yeah, I mean, guardrails aren't perfect on any machine that exists. Like, let's be fair about that. I'm not here to defend any vendor. I don't work for any of them, right? But like, I think let's be fair, and like, as scientists, try to set the controls properly.
why is
Guardrail.
that? Is that?
Why are guardrails? I mean, we just talked about it. Like, there are too many edge cases to be able to understand in a corpus that has hundreds of billions of different particular data points that could be interfaced with at any given time by any given human. Like that's like it's like trying to say, we watched Artemis. It was one of the most incredible things that humans have achieved happen. I watched it. It was amazing. But even they recognize that there's a large amount of risk, even with all the controls and guardrails they have in place on every single system, all the redundancy, there's still risk, right? And I think we're not talking
toilet.
right. So I think there's a situation here where we have to kind of break down what we're talking about into tractable pieces, or it's too big for us to think about. There's a decision to build things in the first place, which I think we've talked about earlier, about at the algorithmic level, at the methodological level, there are responsibilities of those people who build those things, who release those things, who do that work. And, they have to have a standard of ethics and practice. And I don't necessarily think that exists in a way that's like shared or collaborative at the moment. Then there's turning it into software, and into like commercial software in particular that someone can buy, right? And so like those are, financial decisions, those are shareholder driven decisions, those are individual developer decisions, people who are putting fingers to keyboard. And then there's how you use it, right? If something's available as an individual, do we have responsibilities about how we expose that to people who may or may not have the ability to make their own decisions or are educated well enough to do it, right? I think that all these levels matter. And I think it's not necessarily, we can do it, but I don't think it's necessarily honest for us to say that there aren't, guardrails and policies and laws required at each one of those levels in order to get us to a place which is reasonably safe, right? And I think all these things are active areas of research. Yeah.
So we're partway through the interview. I thought we should take a break and start talking about the funny side of things, something a little bit lighter. So in your experience, whether this be something you've experienced firsthand or just heard of secondhand as like a legend of somebody doing this, what is the funniest context or scenario in which you've seen someone try to pass off a deep fake as being real?
Oh, I think I don't know if it's funny, but like I've had it happen to me where people have tried to do it as students. But like, like to try to like feign participation. Especially when we were in like remote environments during COVID, and
they
like
put up like a deep fake gift of them
yeah,
paying
but it
attention
like,
or
wasn't
something like that.
it wasn't really very good, and it was also like I like at first I was like, does this person trolling me because like they know like I'm gonna notice, right? Like I'm not like it's just kind of awake to that specific thing, and they did not think I was going to notice. And so it was this sort of like game of chicken where I just kept calling on the person and like asking them for like increasingly complex explanations of something, and it just like obviously the like just could not keep up with the real and it got really really bad, and eventually
So
like,
this
all right, man,
was
stop.
a deep faked persona that could respond to questions.
So what it ended up being was a different person who's standing in. So this student could be in another place. I don't know what
Okay.
that story was. Yeah.
And they just put on like a deep fake filter for
It
themselves.
was, yeah, well, it was a face swap deep fake.
Yeah.
So the way those work, you basically drive like an avatar with your face,
Yep.
and then like it does mapping of the features, and then in real time tries to process it. It did not work
So-
very well.
I don't know if this student was working on the deep fake in their work or assignment, but he did a good job of like applying it, right? To
Sure, I
that.
mean, it's just a weird thing to do in a computer vision class. like I think I would do that. I mean, again, no one getting ideas. Do not do this. I am not advocating for it, but like I think like going after this, like do like an English class or a history class. Like I think that's maybe like a higher chance of success, if that makes sense.
I see.
And so you think of yourself as someone who's an expert in the field, to be someone who's able to pick out deep fakes by eye, right? That you've had a lot of experience with it. But is there a funny scenario where you and the model disagreed and you were just like baffled by
Yeah, so
what
a colleague
the model was saying was a deep fake?
Yeah, there's a colleague of mine who did a perceptual study, and I wasn't a part of it obviously because I couldn't be, but like I got a chance to see some of the inputs to it, and it really like, I think this isn't news. Like whenever there are like non-majority pieces or individuals, the models tend to struggle.
Like the biases, like the model bias to, for example, minority or things like
Sure.
that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just wrong on those. Like the term bias, we use it in the way that humans want to use it, which is totally applicable. But like the model is just also just incorrect according to, because it doesn't have the training distribution in it, right? So like anyway, so like I it would often say I was a deep fake as a person, like you know, just literal like authentic images of myself that I took, and that happens 3 or 4 times in a row. You start asking questions, right? Like, okay, like is this a simulation? Like, am I in the Matrix?
Am I an AI?
Yeah,
Am I in the Matrix?
yeah,
Am I what's in AI 2027? Am I the AI making the
yeah, right,
AI?
right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, I'm an engram of myself
Yeah.
to cyberpunk it. Yeah.
Just looking at the questions in the chat at the same time. Okay, so
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say one of the things that our user base is really interested in is the energy efficiency of AI,
Oh, yeah.
right? And it seems like the policy detection sort of things is not going to be helpful in that direction. I would think that it would be adding overhead to the compute time, right? Unless you could do something like pre
Right.
terminating the sequence generation once it
Yeah.
realizes it's doing something wrong or something like that. But I don't know if you have any comments on that
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah, so to be clear, just to expand for everyone who's on the stream, there are mechanisms of like basically fine tuning the models to refuse to answer specific sequences or specific inputs. And if you look at like, there's some research published on this, which I can provide later, where like the larger and more advanced models are actually refusing more. Like they tend to refuse more harmful prompts or harmful questions, but they also tend to just be wrong more when they don't refuse, which is not what we wanted.
Nope.
But that's what happened. And so I think like there are mechanisms which could do that, but I also think you're right that any kind of compute overlay on top of that is going to be worse. I don't know that the current mechanisms, but be they like post processing through policy, engineering or routing specifically to models that handle smaller models that handle content detection and content steering. I don't know that those are contributing significantly in the same way the larger scale, like billion plus parameter models are. But I do think that like at like a high level standpoint, obviously we're building brand new data centers and power sources to try to power these entire systems. And I think it's useful for us to think of them as systems as opposed to these individual components, because it allows us to be lazy about, the total cost of ownership and total cost of deployment. And so yeah, I mean it's a really big problem. I think cooling is an issue, power generation issue, but I think also one of the things that goes under the radar is the like sort of precious mineral or rare earth minerals that go into chipset design and builds that also are behind all of this. And like I don't even know what factor Eric you would even think of, like now we're increasing the production in anticipation of demand, like more than ever in human history of chipset design, and like obviously that's going to have significant resource implications over time.
Yeah, one of the people in chat brought up the helium element shortage.
Yeah.
That's something that's a hot button issue right now because of the use of helium in MRI machines and the
right. Yeah, I did see that.
That it's going to be taking away from medical equipment in order to do data science.
Yeah, I got an email saying basically MRIs are going to be 6 months delayed for emergency. So I'm already experiencing it. I don't need an
so
MRI.
That's something that's actively impacted currently because of the wow.
Yes.
Okay.
Can you say why the helium is used? Which part is used?
Well, that's not my expertise area. Maybe
Eric,
Eric.
do you know where
Not off the top of my head. I would have to look it up. I just saw the headline.
Is it for like a cooling system or something for the big data center?
I don't know.
Interesting. Well,
yeah, you've definitely reached the end of my, like, now we're talking about fabs and chip builds. That's not my kind of science.
So I ask questions specifically like for the career people who are interested
Sure.
into joining the field. So now that we hear a lot of people saying like don't do computer science. I read recently like UC Berkeley this year was the first year that they had the least application for computer science student entering like the university.
Yeah.
So what's your take about doing computer science as a career or as studying it with all these like tools that kind of make it so easy to write code
Yeah.
and develop all these things without any studying of it? So
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna sound a million years old, but I don't think I have a choice. So I learned code on a Sun machine, in C++, and Java with no interpreter. I mean, like with a with a like code interpreter with no like IDE or any tools. So just like writing like a you know Emacs file and then just literally
yes,
CLI.
another Emacs user.
Yeah, right. And so like
All the kids be like VS
they're,
Code.
they're
and
like,
I'm
they're like,
no,
what are you
Emacs,
talking
man.
about? Yeah, they're like, what? Like, literally, what are you talking about? Like, no, seriously. Like, okay, so for people don't know, like there used to be like more manufacturers of computers than there are now, right? And they used to have totally different architectures that could not talk to each other, and like have their own instructions. You had to learn all that stuff. But I learned how to code like that, and I learned data structures and algorithms in these exact same, learned how to implement a list and and pops and all that stuff with that. And then, as I was doing work in the government and industry, all of a sudden, like these really powerful IDEs came out. We started using, I think, much higher level languages. Python became a thing. I think folks in the data science community were spending time with R, a much higher level language. And then we started having these like really powerful abstractions placed on top of Java and JavaScript. Right. And like now we have these like crazy tools and libraries that basically abstract away all the things that we were doing. Like, I don't think I taught or TA'd a CS class when I was working. I don't think they do architecture, like computer architecture, in the same way that we did it. I don't think they have like a operating systems class anymore. And so like I'm saying all this stuff to say that like every generation someone says computer science is like it's done, like no, you'll never need to know it. It's all being abstracted away. And the reality is, yeah, it's getting easier to do things that were lower level tasks and enabling more and more complex systems to be built by a wider group of people. But isn't that the point? Isn't that what we were trying to drive for in the first place? Like, I don't really think that's a threat. I think it means you have to change. I think it means you
that's my question.
Yeah.
Like how
I think you have to change. I think like what I'm experiencing happening is really fun, which is that like I was always more of a systems guy. I loved putting things together and getting them to work in like in concert with each other. And like as I became more and more senior in the DS and AI world, they were like, well, we just need you to be specialized. You got to understand how like you're the diffusion guy, or you're the even like deeper than that, like you're specifically a LoRa guy. Like that's all you work on, right? And now I'm seeing it go backwards, where you have to understand, technical concepts broadly enough to be able to understand how they interlock properly, like Legos or Minecraft or whatever. And I think that's the skill set that's going to endure. In addition to bringing in other interdisciplinary components of it, like product management, like understanding UI and UIX and user research design, all those things that used to be like not a part of the job are now a part of the job organically, and I would say that's probably a good thing. So I'm all for increasing the surface area of people who can interface with computers. We're going to get better products. We're going to get better things, more science with that. But I think to say that all you're going to come in and do and work on is one thing, I think that's probably not realistic. Like I don't think that's where we're going.
So you see the value of like expansion more than like disappearing. It's like shifting and expanding the skills that are needed.
Yeah, I think shifting and expanding the skills. And then also I think we are in one of those inflection points where things are changing, and we have to be open to, while you're in school, perhaps you may have to figure out a new thing to focus on than what you started with. I was in my second year of my PhD when ChatGPT was released, right? So like I had to pivot, and it's just kind of a part of being in this field. But if you like working on hard problems, if you like discovering new tools, if you like building things that seems like fantasy or science fiction a couple of years ago, this is still the place for you. It's going to require some creativity.
I empathize with that wholeheartedly. I was with you in learning some of those very low level tools in school, and I'm using basically none of them. I had a course where I learned C, and we were able to. Our final project for that class was to write a bash interpreter in C and to do like all the system calls using C functions and stuff like that. I had a class where we were able to do homework in Minecraft using Redstone because it was like logic gates and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It was like, so one of our projects as part of that class was making like a timer that had an LCD screen, and we were able to do that in Minecraft. I tried. It's way too hard.
Yeah.
Because Minecraft has like the decay over length problem that you have to use like repeaters for, and that just complexified it way too much. So I just ended up using their software. But yeah, I'm not using any of that now, because the thing that really dominated the research was my last year in undergrad. I took a class on this weird new thing called machine learning, where I learned about a neural network and tried to do reinforcement learning for the first time, and that's
relevant. Reinforcement learning has come up, I think, recently. So that's good.
And so when I first joined my PhD research, what the field looked like was, it, at least in the biology that I was doing, it was all statistical biophysical simulations, right? That they had statistical methods to sort of approximate the biophysics, but it was still really, really based in biophysics. Yeah. By the time I finished my PhD, they said, nope, you just put that whole thing in a neural network and it will predict it for you. So I felt that huge transformation during my own research experience. And so I totally empathize with the idea of you got to pivot. If the field is going in a direction that's either more AI or just a different field than what you started with, if that's the problem you want to be working on, you got to move with the field. You could still have niche ideas that on how to tackle things by merging some of the old with the new and coming up with sort of novel solutions to the problem. But to sort of take an old stance on a new field can sometimes not be advantageous to you. To sort of be stuck in the old way and be crotchety and angry that the field has moved on is kind of not the way to live your research life.
Nah.
Yeah, that's
it's also
true.
boring.
Yeah. And I have to say that when I started my PhD, I was basically hired to the big project in Fusion because my old school undergrad in math, I did it with Fortran 90. So I was in Fortran 90, and their big tokamak was controlled by a legacy code who was written in Fortran 77 that was translated into Fortran 90 to like upgrade it. And I was like one of the few who understood it. So I was basically reading Fortran 90 and converted it. At that time, MATLAB was a big thing. So I was converting Fortran 90 to MATLAB, and then Python started. And so we are like the few people who kind of like lived through, I like to say like we lived through internet. When I was born, there was no internet at the beginning. So we lived through the AI change that like the next generation would not know about it. Like no one know about cassettes and the CDs that we used to do and DVDs. It's the same. Like we have this generation.
I think people should learn about physical media. I think that's the one thing that I will retain
Why is
from
that?
my.
It's interesting. Why is that?
Well, I mean, I think we're experiencing now. So, I am a gamer. Like, I know we haven't gotten into that like at all, but like I am, and so I did the whole full digital transformation where I was like, okay, like my entire digital library is now owned by PlayStation or Microsoft or whatever, and then I'll tell you exactly what happened. I don't. This is really silly. I'm a basic gamer, whatever. Like, I liked the FIFA games, the older ones where they had this like. This like thing where you could play as like an individual. There's a story mode basically to it. It was beautiful, and I loved it. And I never finished it. And I was like, okay, well now I'm I'm established. I've got my own house, got my own rig, everything set up. Let me play them. I went back to try to launch these, which certainly would be almost free because they're like now 7-8 years old, and they're gone. You cannot get them unless they're on physical media because they dropped the license, and so they're no longer available. Even if you paid for them, you have to go get the physical disc, right? So for me, I think as things change and as we grant more and more of our like digital lives to organizations, which may be the right thing to do for many parts of our lives, abstract it. The things you really want to own, like you want to take with you to a deserted island at the end of humanity, you want to make sure those are on physical media, because you certainly aren't going to be able to stream them once that access is removed, or if some licensing situation changes, or you get into a dispute, or you get banned. Like all those things are in play, and I just like firmly believe, especially from an artist and a creative perspective, you want to own those things. You paid for it, right? So
Yeah.
that's my
Yeah,
rant
if
on
you
that.
want to know why physical media is important, ask people who bought a Stadia.
Yeah, great price. Well, you could can't you use the controller still?
Or an-
I have one. Yeah. You can use it with Windows computers still, and maybe Mac. It's a very valuable ish.
It's a collectible. Yeah.
It's collectible. That's true.
It's a very expensive brick.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a because they still sold games for full prices on that thing, and people were able to play it for all of like a year. Was that how long the Stadia was active?
Stadia
I don't
was
remember.
live
think it was
for
a
a
while.
few years.
A few years.
I would say,
now, was it stable for a few years? That's a different question.
yeah. I checked it
Yeah.
out on launch. It was very unstable and kind of not great. But it had like a good almost 2 years of being really stable and usable, I think, if I'm remembering
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, and then they got their lunch eaten by GeForce Now, and it's got all that. But
Let's see. Other questions that I've seen. So, if you can, do you have any intake about the AI arm race that is happening between like different companies, like tech companies, on like these type of product, but also in an international way between like
Yeah.
China and the US, or like OpenAI versus like Anthropic? And what do you think about that?
yeah, I mean, I think we're experiencing a little bit of what it must have felt like to be a part of like the space race back in the day. I think we're starting to experience it, and obviously when our kids and our kids are talking about this time period, it'll probably seem a lot more romantic than it is. But like it's it's like the absolute rules of capitalism playing out in like real time, and it's messy, right? Like I think we're all kind of seeing that it's not just like who has the best model. It's not just who has the like fastest compute. It's also about who can create relationships with the right labs across organizations, across governments, and who can get land grants approved. Like it's a lot, right? And so for me, I'm really hoping that we don't lose ourselves as humans trying to chase like an outcome that isn't even like necessarily collectively held yet, and just trying to like get adoption as the only metric. I hope we like start congealing around, well, these are the benefits to humanity that we think are going to be achieved both commercially and not, and let's figure out who's the leaders and like reward those leaders for that. I hope we do that. But I don't know what's going to happen. I definitely, if you were to say in 2021, like everybody would have been like, well, OpenAI is going to be the next like Tesla plus SpaceX super org, and like nothing will ever touch them. And then like I'll remember like the first couple of weeks I started using Claude Code, and I was like, oh my god, like I think Anthropic might have really found something here. And then you like use Nano Banana and Gemini, you're like, wow, that's pretty impressive. So I think we're in the middle of a leapfrogging situation, and it's certainly not over, right? So we're gonna see what happens.
But don't you think that like a drawback of that is that there's a lot of exaggeration, embellishment, and hyper inflated like statements about what they can do? Like as an expert yourself,
Sure.
Like, do you
Yeah.
believe in all these like big marketing things that will
No.
tell you like will solve and do everything?
Of course not. But like that's my job. My job, that's my role in society, is to push back on that and to apply robustness to it, to do evaluations, to build mechanisms of intervention to it. That's my job.
Yeah.
But I think it's like unreasonable for us, and I think I've touched on this before, like the companies, like we could have a conversation that would last many more hours than we have on this stream about whether or not the companies should perform like where they should be ethically, where they should be situated, how the like
Mhm.
leaders should perform. And it's an interesting conversation, but it's not the one I think we actually have agency over here. Like the one we have agency over is like they're existing in a society that we actually, as individuals, as a community, have way more power in. So there must be some utility someplace that people are getting, or if there isn't, we need to do a better job of communicating that amongst ourselves and getting to that and forcing them to do that, right? Like I don't think we can expect Anthropic or OpenAI to pursue anything other than their shareholder return. Like that is like that's what they're here for. But I also think that like to say that there's no benefit at all out of like transformer based or generative based systems, like I just don't think I don't think that's honest. I know a lot of people who believe in full abolition of it, and I really support everybody, especially creatives, like having control over their own information, control over their own IP, and definitely support them refusing if that's what they want to do. But I also have experienced, as a developer, I'm not a front end person, and now I can, and like that's really different than the way it was even a year ago. It's just so I think we're in a situation where like you're right, yeah, there are drawbacks to it, there are big drawbacks to it, and like the way we need to deal with it as a society, as a bunch of individuals, is to make sure that we're working together to make sure that the technology benefits us, right? Like that's the control, the power we really have. And so I hope that we figure it out, because the other side of that is that we're being driven to like a world which I don't think actually is in our best interest, and I don't think actually provides benefit back to the individual level.
Yeah.
And so you sort of touched on this a lot over the case of the over our hour and a half long conversation.
Yeah.
It happens. But what would you say are good uses of AI that you've found super useful in your own workflows?
Yeah. I mean, so again, like my full disclaimer of talking about AI, we're using the full set of AI things here.
Agreed.
Yeah. So I mean, like I will say that some of the labs that I work with did this really cool project, and it basically was a machine learning algorithm that was used by a government organization to help them to identify who would be most likely to not take advantage of their benefits that they would be entitled to, and then like was attached to a bunch of workflows like marketing mailers, direct reach outs, all the way up to making sure a person like visited this like elderly person's house to make sure that they didn't lose access to a benefit that they were entitled to as a taxpayer, right? Like
Interesting.
that feels like a good use of machine learning to me.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
And so like that's an example of one that that I've had work with that very same lab, and we do things that are in that vein. I think now that we're getting really kind of I think better at like indexing and data at the like larger scale level, I think being able to encode and then have good search mechanisms, and I know it's gotten worse over the recent memory, but I'm talking about like Google 2015 to 2019, right? Like being able to access information that was generated in a different part of the world in a different language, completely outside of your domain experience, and then having that be a part of our collective knowledge base as humans, like that is a good use of machine learning to be able to enable that. And it was there. Like I think it obviously is possible to do. And so like for me, it starts with like it has to actually center humans. It has to actually center people. And the benefit needs to be something that we actually collectively agree to, right? And I don't know what the like voting mechanism for that looks like, but like we actually do have to accept that rather than it being forced on us for a corporate or shareholder end. So like those are the types of examples that I would come up with. I think we know that it's possible, it has been done. We just don't have enough examples of it, and I think that's the part that makes us have this like negative view, in my opinion.
Yeah, agreed. I have to add that diversity, equity is so important
Yeah.
to in this like world where like the AI is used, and to be included into
Yeah.
that as actors, but also as customers,
Sure.
and tailor it to them through what we were saying before, these biases and this
Yeah.
training thing, but also the individual who work there and see these like outreach that has to be done though.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've experienced a lot of that. Obviously, I'm sure you have too.
Mm-hmm.
I really wish I had a answer to it, because it was certainly, I've got a kid. I don't want that to be the world that she has to grow up in. And, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I do have to acknowledge that like some of the things I've experienced there have also led me to think differently and to approach problems differently. Um,
How come? In what way?
well, I definitely haven't had access to the same resources folks in my peer set have had as I've gone through my career. It's just part of the game. I mean, we could talk about the many different ways that it implements,
Mhm.
but I don't think anyone looking at me should be surprised by that.
Yeah.
And when you don't have that, it makes you think about, well, like, can I solve a problem with less resources? So like I can give you an example, like deepfake detection work that I've been kind of citing here.
Mhm.
I ended up using like a ensemble based classifier system. So like we're talking about like creating boosted trees, but on the distributions of embeddings, similarity calculations to try
Mhm.
to find differences across the temporal landscape. So like the same thing we were talking about before, but like just with technical terms now.
Mhm.
And that is a really simple way of thinking about things. It's just statistics.
Mhm.
Things that I was doing, as a baby data scientist, but applied to an extremely advanced problem, which is deepfakes, right? Which is like
Mhm.
real-time deepfakes. And I managed to find a smaller model that worked well enough, better than previous generations, maybe not the state of the art, but better than previous generations. And I could reproduce it instantaneously. And that was using a technique that I basically could and did research on my MacBook, right? So I
Mhm.
didn't have clusters of GPUs sitting in some data center in Washington. I had my brain and the like desire not to fail. And I think like those sorts of environments, though there should never be required, they oftentimes do lead to innovation. And I don't want to discount like
Mhm.
all these groups of people who don't have access to the best and brightest. Like they're
Mhm.
still fallen, and they can, and you can. And so I want to give that hope, because it's certainly been a factor in my life, a theme in my life.
Yeah, yeah. And I absolutely agree with you that like the AI tools that are here, exist here, have to kind of like help with this access to this
Yeah.
knowledge, to these like tools and capacity that like some people won't be able to have, but thanks to that they can create websites for their businesses
Yeah.
and do many things that like usually require more like means and like people, for sure, for sure. In the other hand, I have to ask you the other question, which is we talk about good things for sure for AI. What are the things that are should be using less I guess. And I'm targeting
Yeah.
specifically for children, as you mentioned. We
Yeah.
have kids as well. And what's your take about like specifically children
Yeah.
exposure to AI, and in general, like where can we kind of decrease this like addiction?
Yeah, I think like this is probably broader than just AI. I think like
Mhm.
having, this is going to be such a hard thing to talk about, because as you know, like we give so much, and I think this is global. I mean, like obviously different countries have different rules and laws, but like
For sure.
one of the things I was most sort of like taken aback by is that when I had a kid, is that like basically no one tells you what you can and cannot do with that kid. It's like in your house, you're making all the rules and all the laws. And like you don't really figure this out until like you're like, oh, wait a minute, I've been like influencing my kid in this subtle way that I didn't intend the whole time. Because I thought that like school would teach them that. Like, no. So I think like this is gonna be an intensely personal conversation, because I don't know that I can project what other people should do, just the way that things work. But I'll tell you that like I don't really. I mean, my daughter is not. She's not like divorced completely from technology. That's not true. She like I have an iPad that she can use and it's hers. I don't like use it. And then there's she can watch TV once a week, right? But there is a lot of controls, and there always have been, placed on what type of content she consumes and like how much agency she has to be able to interact with it alone, right? And that's I think not going to change for quite some time until I'm able to help to imbue her with the sorts of things we've been talking about at the individual
like
level.
digital
Yep.
hygiene
Right,
and things like
exactly. And I think we've got a responsibility as parents, and I think even just as people who like are older than other people, to to help folks out as they're figuring out who they're going to be and they're making their mistakes, to have that not be permanent, right? The thing that makes me the most frustrated about the current state is that people are just living their lives. They're in middle school and they're having their lives like projected into this like machine that perpetuates right forever, and that's not fair. Like we had a chance to be somewhat anonymous and make a lot of mistakes, and like that's actually an important part of growth. And so when I think about AI in particular, or the chat systems, because almost all of them are hosted platforms with really complicated terms, T's and C's, I think you got to be really careful about letting your kid unmonitored use those things, because it's going to perpetuate. Like they get to keep it. That's the way that the current systems are architected. And so as things mature and go through time, social media I know has changed. There's still issues with it, but like there are more controls than there were at the beginning. And so folks can, decide what the risk profile looks like as things mature, but we're really early with the chat systems. So I personally, like, my kid has never interfaced with a chat AI system, and I don't think that's going to change until she's much older, right? And she's 6 right now, so like I think it's going to be some time.
Yeah, but there is also vulnerable people also on the other spectrum, like the elderly.
Yeah,
The elderly. I have parents who are elderly,
right.
and they are like sending me crazy things.
Yeah, I know, it's crazy stuff.
Like I don't know if it's a trend, but these days it is
Yeah.
crazy how many like fake news. And I try to educate them and tell them, you are targeted. Like the more you see this fake news and send it to us, the more like the algorithm is going to send you more fake news. And I teach them basic things of check check who is posting this, like what are like the thing that we talked about, like you were saying about the lighting and the movement in the videos, these things, the elderly people don't see it, or don't like see it well, or don't want to learn about it. But again, it's a kind of a whack-a-mole that you were saying. It's getting better and better. So it's very hard to teach this, or to be always suspicious, and then like they can get like completely crazy informations and spread it like spreader, and be like the tools that these false and fake news are using to kind of diffuse. So it's so hard also.
It is hard. Yeah, I think these are the things that keep devolving back into policy, right? I mean, like this is an education thing, but like you shouldn't be having to do that as a service for everybody, right? Like like that. I think there are societal level interventions that are probably needed. And I hate to say it, but like that stuff's not free. So we have to decide as a community that we want folks that are vulnerable to be safe. That we want to make sure that like when things change, when the generation technology changes, that they don't get left behind. And yeah, I mean, all I can say to folks is get involved at the local level. Be a person that's a member of a community, not just someone that community happens to.
Agreed. Yeah. Another
So there's
thing.
a take in chat that I kind of want to paraphrase, because I think it's pretty interesting, that people are wondering whether the benefits that are observed through using AI tools are actually due to a lack of domain expertise, right? That they're saying that, oh, we can use AI to do front end dev or vibe coding or yada, 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 and think that it's working properly and the way that they want it to be. But in reality, it's just due to a lack of expertise to have the discerning eye to be able to tell whether something's low quality or not.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have any comments on that.
I mean, I think it's probably true sometimes, right? But I don't know that that's useful as an overarching like catch-all, because wouldn't that be true about any abstraction ever made, right? I mean, like Stack Overflow, I would have, you know, when I was teaching students, and I would have to like tell them, look, you need to implement this algorithm from the scratch by yourself so you understand how it works. Don't just copy paste it from Stack Overflow, because it'll probably work, but like you won't know anything about how it happens, and then when it breaks in real life, when you're trying to use it, you won't be able to do anything about that, right? Like this isn't new. Like this is like not new at all. And so I think like what we were teaching, what we're hoping to teach in those types of, you know, programs were a mechanism of thinking, of interrogating a system, of having like robust testing harnesses, of doing collaborative architectural investigation, and, you know, and like when things went wrong, doing retrospectives and making sure people understood how not to make those mistakes again. Like these sorts of techniques maybe become more important now because fewer people have the core like fingers to keyboard understanding of each individual algorithmic implementation, or each individual implementation from a systems perspective, but the techniques still exist to be able to do that correct interrogation. So you may be right that like, yeah, like it's super impressive for a group of people because they don't know what good looks like. But also, if it gets those groups of people to be able to be innovative and to build things that they previously wouldn't have interfaced with, there is a benefit for those people. Right now, the question is, how do we take them from that place to a place of deeper understanding so we get robust systems that perform well in the real world? Like that's a progression of the field, in my opinion. But I don't know that I would feel comfortable being like, well, everything is just bad because no one knows what they're talking about. Like I don't think I've had that experience.
Yeah.
That, and also I think I would argue, even for an expert, what the AI can provide is a level of groundwork for you to work with, right?
Yeah,
It sort
yeah.
of takes the statue you're sculpting from 0 to 50, and then you as the expert are able to take it to the finished product, right? That's what I see a lot in programming as well, that
Yeah.
it can take care of some of the rote tasks, the tasks that you know how to do, but it would take you like a half an hour. It can
Yeah.
just chug out in like a minute or something
I
like
think
that.
most of the I think most of the criticism comes in the security domain, to be honest with you. Like I think that's where like most people are like, well, like look what happens, it's a vulnerability. But like so much software is vulnerable. Like I don't think people really understand how much bad code existed way before ChatGPT or any transformer model existed in this scale. Like I'm sure that a lot more of it's going to get deployed that has the same vulnerabilities, but the reason it has those vulnerabilities is because it's in the training distribution from bad code that it's ingested. So like I think the takeaway from that is we need to all be more conscious about security when we're learning how to build systems. Like that's the takeaway. Not that like, oh, like, you know, well, all of a sudden we have an epidemic of security. Like hacking is not new, guys. Like I don't think that's
Yeah.
yeah. That's like,
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Um, well, we wanted to talk, and I think I talked to you a little bit about the real rating system. So I selfishly want to have like advice and intake from an expert, and so here at Real Good AI, we wanted to kind of like in the base for in the principle of transparency when people are producing these different media like a video, picture, or content, code, whatever, we wanted to create like a kind of a movement of community rating themselves with different like depending on what the how much AI they use. So we call it the real rating system, and
okay.
it stands for reported engagement with AI level. And we have like 0 to 5 level, like 0 being no AI
Right.
in the whatever we're producing, to full AI 5, which is like basically AI did everything, AI generated most of your work. And we are kind of like, you know, looking to have it used by as many as possible. What do you think about these rating system, this rating system, and this like push for more transparency in how much AI
Yeah.
is involved in these digital products.
So to make sure I understand it, it's a like a community sourced or a crowdsourced, like ordinal rating system
Mhm.
or
It's
products
not
that
a
yeah.
crowdsourced, it is
It's
self-disclosure.
self.
So the
Oh, I
So
see.
person who
so in the
I see.
Discord, you can see my stream, and I don't know if you're on,
Oh, okay.
but down
Yeah,
down
yeah, I
below
got
me
it.
there on the edge, that number one, that's
Uh-huh.
like the real rating for this
Oh,
production. So
okay.
the notion is like on screen in a video, or in the in the corner of an image on social media, or
I see.
in the maybe on the front page, or maybe in the somewhere in a document. You
Yeah.
just self-report like,
Uh-huh.
this is the level of AI I used, just for clarity for
Yeah.
whoever's reading this, watching this, whatever.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, no, I understand. That's really cool. And like cool that like the community feels like this is something that they would want to participate in. So like I'll say that up front. I have had some experience with sort of self-reporting or like community-oriented governance before. This is like I think folks probably know this, like the responsible AI movement that like I think kind of like started 2015 in Apex to maybe 2017, 18, 19, and then we had a bunch of things that we won't get into happen geopolitically that stressed it. Most of the governance frameworks had some sort of component that was very similar to this. They got way more sophisticated and less sophisticated depending on who you were talking about. And I think there's a lot of really good research. Like if you were to go to a place like ASM Facts, for example, or Kai, they have like a lot of good research that this stuff is to be very, very practically useful inside of communities.
Mhm.
Challenge becomes when it escapes containment, or when you want it to escape containment into like a ring around the community or beyond that, right? And I think if it's your goal to have this be adopted even more widely, like those are the questions I would have, and like what do those visions look like? But as a mechanism internally and like as a thing to do, I think it's great.
Yeah.
well, and so what were the challenges that you saw upon sort of breaching containment as the terminology used?
I think there's a lot of tensions, but like I'll try to like the big ones. The first one is like maintaining definitional stability, right? So like what word means what things to which people, especially when you start bridging cultures, where certain types of use are of any type of technology mean different things. Like I think in like a Western context where people are like very well educated and who have situated themselves on purpose, like real good AI, like that's a certain situation that people have put themselves into. And like, so when you say this is authentic, I'm not using any AI. You're incentivized in that community, I would believe, to say to both tell the truth, but also to have a definition that's more in common, right? I think as you get farther out, and then it could be anything. It could be cultural, it could be education, it could be literal location. What authentic means, or like even what the definition of AI means, changes. It just changes. And I think educating people on what you mean and getting them to be consistent is attention. Like that's one. I think another thing is where this really these types of things really get the best. So like I think I'll use model cards as an example. Is everybody familiar with that is? What that is?
No.
Model
Tell
cars.
that.
Yeah. So a number of researchers, like Tinajibru Debraji, I think Alex Hanna also worked on this. I came up with this like really, I think now integral component of disclosures around responsible AI usage and development, where there was a set of capability or set of like content that needed to be attached to any production or deployed or released ML system that told you about the like lineage of the model, who was a part of building it, what it was supposed to do, what are the features, what are the sort of variances of how it could go right or wrong. It basically is a score sheet that describes what like a spec sheet that describes what it is actually that the model is doing, right? And so this is become kind of like a way on the positive sense for people to participate, even if they aren't experts in responsible AI, to participate in responsible development and design, right? Okay, so good thing. It also became a way for people to sort of content wash or sort of ethics wash And I don't think they meant this to happen. It just was used that way by people once it escaped containment to say, well, I have a model card, so it must be responsible. We've looked at all the things, but the like meat on the bones wasn't there 3 or 4 levels deep on the work actually being done. It was just released. So if you go, for example, to Hugging Face now, and you look at a lot, like there'll be thousands of model cards, like on different models, and I have interfaced personally with models that should never have been released, even though there's a model card saying that it is, in fact, not harmful. So what I'm getting at with this is like, as you start to move into wider circles of people, there's a potential for folks to use it, but not necessarily use it in a positive way. And so I think that's just something to be aware of. Again, I don't have the answer to it. I'm just like, that's like a factor. And the last tension, of course, is policy and government, which is like, let me just put it this way. I've worked with a lot of folks, especially in like, some of the scarier ones, like the defense area and federal government, that are really eager to do the right thing. And then there are folks that sit right next to them who are really eager to just get the thing passed and be able to drop the bombs, do whatever you want to say. All right, like that's like that. The government contains all people, right? Like it's the representation of the community. And so I found when I was trying to introduce some of these more, I think, human-centric practices, there were sometimes tensions between some of those other folks who were more interested in like getting the process of the technology through. And so they often would like look at the sorts of things that we were building or look at the sorts of things we were requiring and use that as like a way to sort of basically say like, we're going to remove this because it slows things down, right? So just like offering it as like as you might get different viewpoints on it. But I think it's rad. But those are the tensions like that I experienced.
Yeah, that expertise is really helpful. It to sort of paraphrase, it sounds like what you're saying is that if you release it, you have to police it, right?
And you also have to be in conversation with the community constantly about how you expect it to be used or how it's changing. If in fact you do want it to change. I mean, like, anyone's ever been a Reddit mod understands this, right? Like, it's not the same as when you start with, right? The community has its own vibe.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that's true. Because releasing it with these different levels, while the technology is changing, for sure, the levels are going to change, and yeah,
that's something we've tried to quote unquote future proof about it. If you notice in very small text on that, there's a 2026. The idea is that it's going to be updated with future years, that we're going to sort of at the end of the year have a session where we talk about what went right with it, what went wrong, how are we going to revamp it next year based on new technologies that are coming out or new ideas about the technology that are coming out. That's sort of the part of the philosophy built into the rating itself.
That's incredible.
That, and also we are also planning on doing sort of a big educational and big adoption push in June. So that will be another aspect to this, that we're going to try and make everyone as aware as possible based on with examples, educational content, getting people to adopt it, basically push that prerogative forward in June, because it's getting kicked off with our executive director and one of our funding founders and member of the board are giving a talk at South by Southwest London.
Oh, nice. Cool.
On the real rating. So we're hoping that will bring a lot of exposure to the idea, and that will sort of take the opportunity there to make sure that everybody gets the right first impression, so that sort of calcifies as it goes on.
That's great. I look forward to seeing everything that comes out of that.
Yeah. And thank you for your advice. It's definitely well regarded and taken into account that you have the expertise behind this, right? You have a lot of expertise on policy and data science as well. So thank you for your expertise on it.
Happy to help.
I think we're getting close to the end of time. I think we usually try and wrap this up with a few sort of standardized questions as well as just some more fun questions. I think one of the fun questions we do pretty often at the end is one of the things that we're trying to push is a more accurate, scientifically accurate depiction of AI in media, right? That typically how AI is depicted is like, we're teaching a robot to love or something like that, or the how, I'm sorry, I can't do that, Dave, the rogue AI that is ruining the system. So from your perspective as an AI expert, what is your favorite depiction currently of AI in media?
Oh man, what a question. I don't know that I would call it my favorite, but the one that feels most prescient is the movie Her. And mainly just that there is a sort of disembodied language system that is in deep conversation with a set of real humans, and that it is evolving, and that those humans that are interacting with those systems aren't necessarily involved in that evolution. And that really feels like a thing we're dealing with right now. Now, the invisible hand are people. Like, we're not, like, it's not like they're self-mutating yet, but like, I think it does feel like we're in this situation where we're having these very intense, I think, personal interactions with these systems, and yet they are like growing beyond our capacity to understand it while we're doing that. And it's like I don't think it's like a fair interaction. So yeah, that's for me.
Bob, do you have questions and anything in mind?
Yeah, any other wrap-up questions?
Well, usually I say we're trying to be respectful of the guest time, but unfortunately today I have a pretty hard out right at 4. So I think that's going to have to be the end of the stream. This has been really great discussion. I feel like I did not contribute as much as I expected to, but I was sort of just sitting, listening, trying to remember that I was playing a game because it was really great. Thank you so much for your time, Justin. This was awesome. I do usually give guests a chance. I don't know what you have going on professionally or personally, but if there's anything that you'd like to plug, anything that you want to mention to chat, website, projects, whatever, if you'd like to do that, now is a great time.
Yeah, you can reach all my stuff at justintime.ai. It's just justintime.ai. Just write it like that, and then you can get access to my blog and all my socials there.
I love the website, Just in Time. I love it. So very
Gotta
nice.
keep it simple.
Awesome. Well, yeah. Thank you again, chat. Thank you everybody for hanging out. We are going to go ahead and cut the stream. We will be back next Thursday with the usual team stream sort of shenanigans. I'm not sure what we'll be playing, but it should be fun. If you have any questions for Mandy or anyone else on staff, come hang out. But yeah, thank you so much to Justin. Very generous to share this time with us. Sorry, are you trying to get in, man?
No. I was saying, thank you for your time. Thank you for the explanation. Thank you for everything. Yeah, that was cool.
Yeah,
Thank you for the opportunity.
I really appreciate talking to you because you ended up plugging a lot of real good AI talking points unintentionally, right? Like, we did not prepare you for this, right? You just ended up saying a lot of the things that we say a lot too, right?
Aww.
So we really appreciated you giving your expertise.
And before I turn it off, chat, make sure that you're following the channel, whatever platform you're on. We stream to Twitch, YouTube, TikTok when it works. We have socials. We have Instagram. We do have a TikTok that we'd love for you to follow. We also have a newsletter. Go to realgoodai.org. You can sign up for the newsletter. You can sign up to work with one of our volunteer groups. We have a wide range of groups with a wide range of expertise that we really could benefit from. We also have a writing contest. If you're a writer or if you want to be a writer, it's a speculative horror AI-themed writing contest. Submissions are going to be coming up in the summer here. All the information about all this is on our website. Thank you so much for watching this stream, and we will see you next week with another real good stream. And thanks one more time to Justin. This was fantastic. And Yeah. Bye, everybody. We're out of here.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, appreciate it.